So sometimes when I start talking in front of a group of people, my face turns red. So we're going to take just a second and see if that happens. Because I found that if I say that and we can laugh together, then it goes right through. And that's just my nervous system's response. My brain is simply telling me, alert, alert, that you're in a potentially risky or vulnerable situation. You're public speaking. It's not safe. Abort mission. Go. Run. And that voice in my head, I lovingly call fearful Fred. And it's the part of my brain that's wired to assess for risk and danger and helps us keep us alive. Fortunately, the rest of my brain can assess the situation and has the capacity to see that while there is some emotional risk of sharing vulnerably with you all, it will not kill me. So it replies, thank you, brain, for trying to keep us safe, but we've got this. And fortunately, my frontal lobe can see that talking with you all about the topic of bisexuality is in deep alignment with my values and joys, including connection and learning and growing and challenging the status quo so that we all may live more authentically. Fearful Fred is still present, but I can put him in the back seat and choose to sit with the discomfort. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm a UU. As my bio says, I'm also a mom and a partner, and I own an occupational therapy business. In my personal and professional life, I enjoy geeking out about neuroplasticity and relationships. And I believe we help shift the world when we align our actions with our heart and our mind. I want to thank the congregation, and specifically the Welcoming Congregation Renewal Team and my mom for welcoming me here today, for doing your work as a congregation, knowing as a faith tradition, we have more to learn about our LGBTQ folks' lived experiences. Thank you for helping to raise up our voices. Today I'm going to share parts of my story about growing up as a bisexual woman in the Midwest US. I'm going to share 6 common myths and misperceptions about bisexuality, and 5 ways that we can, 5 things we can do to ally with LGBTQ folks, with the emphasis on the B today. So we started talking about the courage it takes to align our actions with our values, even amidst discomfort. Whether that's living authentically, allyship, or advocacy. The Latin root of the word courage is cor, meaning heart, you know. And earlier meanings were believed to say courage is to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. It takes courage to live authentically, especially when a person's genuine self does not fall within the norms of the culture they live in. It takes courage to live authentically when there's a very real risk of being ostracized by friends, family, and community. Or when risks include discrimination or bigotry or ridicule. Or even to a lesser extent, the risk of having the validity of your lived experiences negated or debated. We'll talk more about that later. It's also courageous to live true to your heart when doing so can cause discomfort and confusion to those you love. So often, LGBTQ folks are balancing the discomfort we feel internally when we're choosing how much to share about our lives and our family with the potential discomfort of the people around us. Let's look at a seemingly simple question when I got from one of my patients this week. At the end of the session, she said, "So what are you and your family going to do this weekend?" And before I answer that, I'm curious how that might land for any of you. Does that bring up any discomfort? Because for me, it did. I had a relatively short amount of time to make several decisions on how I was going to answer that and be in alignment with my values of honesty, staying in connection with this human, and sustaining my business. This meant balancing my honest answer with the possible consequences of saying something that could make her uncomfortable. You might be thinking, oh my God, what were you going to say to her? They went like this. I said, well, since my daughter's at her other house this weekend, my partner Austin and I are going to go dancing. And I'm really excited about this. We haven't done it since the pandemic, although I'm feeling a little old. So I shared that, and she said, oh, so your daughter's at her dad's this weekend? Crap. Enter myth number 1, that all people have a mom and a dad. See, my patient already knows about my daughter because I've been with this woman for a year, every week, 1 or 2 hours in her home for the last year. So we have small talk and we share about our family. But I've never shared about my daughter's dad because my daughter would say, I don't have a dad. I have 3 moms. So at this point in the conversation, I have a choice. I could take the easy way out and just lie and say, yeah. And I would forego that discomfort, except for the discomfort inside of lying and withholding, and I can't do that. Option 2 is just a little white lie, which is something like, yeah, she's at her other house. And I'd kind of passively avert the part about the dad. But I've learned through trial and error that when someone has the idea in their head that she has a dad, it's only harder later to kind of undo that belief because they're just building the schema of who my family and who my daughter's family is. So it makes it harder in the long run. 3, I could just respond, oh, she's at her other mom's house. And this usually lets the conversation slide by with the right amount of calculated honesty because a lot of people will assume I just simply mean her stepmom. It might elicit just a little eyebrow wiggle, but not so much, not too much discomfort. Lastly, my 4th option, I could say, oh, she's at my ex-wife's house. But now I've just presumably outed myself. She's probably going to assume that I'm gay, which may cause discomfort to her because in occupational therapy, we do have a closely intimate working relationship. Give another 30 or 60 seconds, and we let that potential discomfort pass, and we move right into utter confusion. And she says, but I thought you had a boyfriend. I think my face is getting red again. Yeah. Enter heteronormative myth number 2. You can assume someone's current relationship tells them something about past or future relationships. While I have had almost that exact conversation multiple times before, this past week when it happened, my patient actually responded, oh, Olivia's at your ex's this weekend. And I was like, oh. A little half sigh of relief at that pronoun neutral term of ex. And I could simply say, yeah. So this points out step number 1 of how we can be an ally to bisexual folks. And that is practice using pronoun neutral language. So when she said your ex, that helped me have a positively connecting and comfortable conversation. I didn't have to correct her. She hadn't made an assumption out loud that I had to correct. Parent is another pronoun neutral term, as opposed to mom or dad. And I know it's hard to change our language. It's hard for me too. I'm honestly still learning it. And there's no need to beat yourself up if you mess up and make an erroneous assumption. We're all practicing. Even I grew up in the same heteronormative waters of the Midwest. Step number 2 of being an ally to a bisexual person is to simply accept whatever information they're willing to share with you about their sexual orientation or their family. Even if that means sitting in the mild discomfort of not understanding it fully. Did anyone maybe feel a little confused when I said Olivia has 3 moms? Yeah, it's okay to be confused. That's understandable. That's not something we typically see. Even I sometimes will see families that have a different dynamic that I don't understand, and it's okay not to understand. To be an ally, you could accept that I wanted to share those parts of my family with you without expecting me to share more. It's refreshing to be able to have a light conversation and not have to give my entire backstory every time. Okay, So now back into the conversation with my patient, I'm safely back in pronoun neutral language and I can relax. Until she says, "Where are you going?" Crap. Because we were gonna go to Metro, a queer bar in Indianapolis. Should this be okay to share with someone who asks me what bar I'm going to in 2023? Yes. Does it mean I know it was safe as a business owner? No. I shared this little part of the story today just to shine a light on the emotional work that LGBTQ folks experience in day-to-day conversations still. We have made enormous strides in the 20 years that I've been part of that community, and we still have a lot more work to do. So speaking of where we have come from, I want to roll back to the late 90s when I was coming of age in very rural Indiana. We'll zoom in on 1997, which was also had some historical milestones for the LGBTQ community. I was 16 years old, and I had kissed exactly 2 boys, and I knew 0 bisexual people. I had hardly heard of the word, honestly. In fact, I only knew 2 gay people in the world at the time. Any guesses? One was Ellen DeGeneres, who in 1997 came out on her TV show, which was an incredibly bold action. We might not see that today, but back then that could have been the end of her career. And she affected countless lives. Just the ripple of that brave action was enormous to me and so many people out there. The second person was my super close friend who was apparently a lesbian, although in Boone Grove, Indiana in 1997, no one really used that word. And Danielle was her name. One night, Danielle shared with me that she was in love with me. And I was genuinely flattered, but I responded, "I'm not that way. Remember, I had kissed 2 boys." Well, as our friendship grew, so did some pretty big feelings. I remember laying one night trying to make sense of these feelings, and I was pretty distressed. I was like, does this mean that I'm gay? I can vividly recall laying on my stomach on my waterbed, just my body full of tension and my thoughts whirling. I was like, I can't be gay. I've had a boyfriend, and I really liked him. Okay, am I straight? That doesn't seem to fit anymore. But I didn't have the exact same feelings for Danielle that I had had for boys I had liked. Does that make it less real? Enter myth number 3, that bisexuality means a person experiences the same amount or type of attraction to all genders. So I want to pause for a second on that myth. We're going to come back to it. But I want to just do a sidestep and talk about the word bisexual, because some people have a concern that it's transphobic. Bi meaning perhaps boy and girl or female and male. But if we look at other words to describe sexuality, such as heterosexual and homosexual, and we look at the root of those words, hetero meaning different or other, so other than us, attracted to someone other than us, or homosexual, attracted to someone the same as us, that's where we can, it doesn't necessarily mean boy and girl or female and male, but bi meaning both. So both people who have a gender similar to me and a gender or sex different than me would be an example of a way of looking at bisexuality. Now, some people want to avoid this the potential misunderstanding and use the word pansexual, pan with the root meaning all, so the ability to be attracted to all genders. But that doesn't resonate for every bisexual person. So hopefully that will clear that up about that a little bit. All right, back to myth number 3. That bisexuality means a person experiences the same amount and type of attraction to all genders. False, we do not. The American Psychological Association defines the term bisexual as someone who experiences emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to more than one sex or gender. Not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same extent. If if I had just had the Google back in 1997 to help me with this. Needless to say, there was not the context for bisexuality at this time and place in my teen years. And later in life, I would even learn that some of my family had the misperception that my bisexual identity meant that I wanted to be a boy, which couldn't be farther from the truth. And that is myth number 4. In reality, one's sexual orientation, who you're attracted to, is distinctly different from your gender identity. Okay? So now we know bisexuality is simply the capacity or experience to be attracted to multiple genders. I don't know about you, but if you're someone who experiences attraction, I think it's safe to say that attraction for one person can be very different from the attraction to another person. And it's the same for bisexuals. But this misperception that attraction would feel the same for all genders confused me for a really long time. I thought I wasn't a legit bisexual if I didn't experience attraction equally. Enter myth number 4. Bisexuals are just confused. I did just admit to being confused. But who in here has never felt confused about their sexuality or romantic relationships? I don't think it's saved just for the bisexuals. And yes, it can feel confusing when our experience doesn't fit into the culture's norm of or the culture's narrative of what is normal, but that is simply the fault of the culture having a narrow definition of sexuality and relationships. Suffice it to say, you can trust when a person shares that they're crushing on someone, or they like someone, or they like them, or they love them. You can trust them, period. No matter their age, no matter their label. You can trust their experience. And this is step number 3 of how to be a good ally. So we left off where I'm 16 years old, realizing I'm probably a bisexual, and the biphobic myths kept pouring in. Enter myth number 5, that bisexuality is just a phase. I hear lots of, yes, this is probably the biggest one, right? I was afraid I would ultimately hurt my best friend if I tried dating her. Would I eventually come to my senses and realize that I'm just meant to be with a guy? I lived in an extremely binary world, and I couldn't make sense of my experience in those limited options. Spoiler alert, flash forward to 2007, and Danielle and I got married in this church. And I say married because we were married in our hearts and in the community, but it would be another 8 years before that would be legal. Needless to say, I don't know if I just said this, needless to say, it was not just a phase. It was a deeply meaningful 15-year relationship in which we had our incredible daughter, who's here today with her nose in a good book. I'll never forget my grandpa on the night of my wedding. He had a bite of his wedding cake in his fork that matched my wedding gown. And he called me over to his table at the reception and he said, "You know, this is like any other wedding." Thank you, Grandpa. Myth number 6, bisexuals cannot be monogamous, and if they are, they aren't happy or satisfied. False. And this one was hurtful. I accepted that the general public didn't understand homosexuality, let alone bisexuality. But when one of the best men in our wedding would later say to me, "Well, I know you can't be just with her," it hurt me deeply. If he, a gay man and a dear close friend of ours, couldn't believe in the integrity to honor my relationship vows, who could? Bisexuality is a sexual orientation. It describes the capacity for attraction. Monogamy and non-monogamy are relationship styles, a choice about how people want to structure their relationships. These are 2 distinctly different facets of sexuality and relationships. The story of my best man underscores the difficulty that many bisexual people experience, being an outsider to both the straight and gay communities. I remember in 1999 when I co-founded the Gay Straight Alliance at the University of Southern Indiana. You'll notice I said Gay Straight Alliance because that's what they were called back then. You couldn't find mention of bisexuality. So my attempt at inclusion was to call the group Spectrum, trying to nudge in there this idea of a spectrum of sexualities. This is why bi-specific spaces and bi-visibility are important. Austin and I went to Bi Night during Pride for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, and it was amazing. Representation matters. So steps to being an ally number 4 are to wave the flags and to pin the pins. The GLBTQ paraphernalia is still really helpful to our community. When I was in college, I would scan the professors' doors looking for the Human Rights Campaign equality sticker, because in Evansville, Indiana, it was pretty conservative 20 years ago, and I knew that those would be safe spaces. Safe places, because safe places in that era mattered. We're talking about Matthew Shepard time frame. But safe spaces still matter deeply. I mentioned bi-visibility. What is that? It's a response to something called bi-erasure, the tendency to ignore, erase, or explain away bisexuality. Since I was married to a woman, most people assumed I was a lesbian. So later in life, when I was single, it was shocking the first time I dated a man. One coworker was so happy for me, I truly believe she thought she had prayed the gay away. Sad but true. Needless to say, it was shocking when I dated a woman again, okay? So, what's that? She didn't pray enough, right? She stopped praying, yes. Steps to being a bisexual ally number 5. Don't assume someone's sexual orientation based on their current or past relationships. I'd like to end today with a question that a boyfriend once asked me. He said, what is the most positive thing that came from the difficulty of growing up bisexual in the Midwest? It was such a good question. And I'd say that when you're forced at a young age to realize that you cannot fit inside the cultural norm, it frees you up to make other choices outside of the norm. And that's what I wish for everyone, is that we all have a little bit more freedom to live authentically, to live our truths. It takes courage for each of us to live authentically, and even more for people whose identity doesn't fall within that norm. It can be uncomfortable to stand up and offer alternative viewpoints from popular opinion. This is the work of allies and advocates, taking brave action to advocate for marginalized folks. And Unitarian Universalists know this well. After all, we stand on the side of love. Okay? Thank you.